My name is Tom, and I'm an alcoholic. I got sober October 6th, 1996. I was drinking from an early age. I started off drinking when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. I drank rather sociably, I would imagine, for the time that I had grown up in the early 70s, and weekends were where I started most of my drinking. In my early days, I smoked a lot of pot and did some other stuff, but drinking was always my drug of choice. By the time I was 18 years old, I was convinced in my mind that I had an alcohol problem, but I thought it to be rather humorous. I come from a family of alcoholics. My father was alcoholic, died when he was 63 of a heart attack. He was told on the day before he died after his heart attack that he had to quit drinking and quit smoking, and he had told the doctor he would quit smoking, but he was not going to give up the beer, and he went on his whole life thinking he wasn't an alcoholic, but yet drank a case of beer a day. So I believe alcoholism was the reason for his death, although the death certificate perhaps was from the major heart attack that he had had. That was in my mid-20s, but I got married when I was 20 years old, and I drank alcoholically, I worked alcoholically, and I was a highly functioning alcoholic. I made a lot of money, did a lot of things, got married young. I very rarely in the beginning would drink to the point that I was completely oblivious to what was going on, and if I did that, I would not be with my family or my kids or my wife. I would do that in a bar and not come home for the night because I knew I was ashamed of that type of behavior. I had been involved with a woman that I cared a great deal about, and my children, of course, I didn't want to hurt them, and I didn't want to be like my father was, and I didn't want to be like my mother was, and I wound up being, if not the same, probably worse. So I went on to drink weekends, and then it worked into almost every day. But until I was in my mid-30s, my alcoholism did not become what it had become, as bad as it was. By the time in my mid-30s, I had reached a level of financial success that I thought I had become something who I never was. And I started to extend my drinking to longer amounts of time. I started to get involved outside the house with events that I should have never got involved with. Other chemicals came into my life at that time, and it was very difficult because I was balancing two lives, and I didn't really know what to do. I didn't address the alcoholism because it had become such a major part of my life. Everything else was less important. I got sober later on, but I remember saying at that time, when I first got sober, when somebody had asked me about alcoholism and where I was at, I said I had 5 kids, so I had said that if I was on the edge of a cliff with my kids and I had a bottle of vodka in one hand and my other hand was free and they were falling, I would save one kid. I would never let go of that bottle. That's where alcoholism had took me. It was just like, I had to have that, or I just felt like I couldn't breathe. But in the mid 80s, I had the 5 kids. I had the house and the dog and the cars and all this stuff. And I was the last one to realize that my business was falling apart. I was the last one to realize that my kids were very unhappy with their life due to my alcoholism, and my wife was becoming more and more unhappy with my behavior and was not able to reach me anymore. I had become very distant in my addiction. My addiction had become so much my focus. And in 19-something, I think it was 89, I had gone to a rehabilitation 12-step program in Long Island, New York, and I remember my son. He was 14 at the time, my oldest son. He came to me one day, they have this family thing, and he came to me and he said to me, "Why do you drink? It's ruining our family." And I looked at him, and that was the first time in many years that I was stuck, because I was always quick to have an answer. But I remember that particular question to be very difficult for me to answer. I looked at him in the eyes and I was like, I had no answer. I was like, I don't know, man. I said, let's keep walking, change the subject, get on with the day, hold his hand, move on. And as it turned out, I didn't have an answer because I was afraid to look at the question. And when I achieved the program, they have, as they do in most rehabs, families can attend it or what have you, and then you speak to the audience and the counselors, and you usually, if you're a humble person, thanked the rehab for helping them get your life back together, blah, blah, blah. And in my alcohol, I still had all my stuff, the cars, the house, the wife, the kids. I still thought very highly of myself because I was a big shot or a legend in my own mind. And I thanked the insurance company for paying the bill, and I couldn't get out of there quick enough. 90 days later or less, I found myself in the Montauk Hotel, coming out of a blackout, and I was like right back to where I started, and I was a mess. And my wife and I had decided, or she had decided, that it would be better that I wasn't involved anymore. And in my anger, because I blamed all of this on her and the kids and the horse and the dog and the father and the train and whatever else I could blame it on, I decided I wouldn't work anymore. So I never went to work, you know. And for a year or two, I closed a reasonably large business and never showed up for any court proceedings. And so I wound up going from some sense of affluence to despair. And when I got out of the rehab, it was in 1990, I think it was in October of 1990. From 1990 to 1996, I went from drinking a few martinis on the way home every night to a quart and a half of vodka every day. For the next 5 or 6 years, I drank until I blacked out. And when I woke up, I drank a little bit because I didn't want to be too alcoholic, just to take the shakes away. And I had moved in with this girl that at one time waited my tables at the bar that I was in when I was married, and I kind of made sure she made enough money to supply me with vodka. And at that time, I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. All I had was this great thing that I thought, this great person who I thought I was in my head. And I always had these still grandiose ideas about how I was going to put my life together. I lived with that woman for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And by the time those 2 years went by, I don't know why I didn't get arrested. I mean, I had driven so many times under the influence, and I could have hurt a lot of people outside of just hurting myself and my own family. And it just wasn't in my story at that time, so I guess it didn't happen for a reason. But the police came looking for me because now, instead of me having all this stuff, I never showed up for court, and I wound up having some legal issues that I was afraid to address. And that's really what it's all about. I had become, well, I realize now, probably all through my life, I was always afraid of facing things, and it was easier to drink and laugh it off than it was to face real issues. And when those issues came, and the police came, and there was 8, 10, 12 of them, I don't know how many there were, I didn't answer the door and escaped, and they call it a geographic change. I moved as far as I could move at that point in my life, which was about 30 miles, because that's as much as I could keep my thoughts together. And I moved into a small apartment in the same girl's mother's house. When I went to this place in Long Island, I was told that if I didn't drink for 90 days and I went to a meeting, my life would get better in spite of me. So I says, well, I'm not going to do the meetings, but at least I'll stop drinking. So for 90 days or so, or 60 days or so, I stopped drinking and put ads in the papers to get my feet back on the ground because I wasn't working. And I still had these beliefs that I was going to make tons of money, pay everybody off, come back home on this big white horse, and everything would change. But, you know, nothing changes if nothing changes. So I went to the point where I got business together. I actually got business, as dysfunctional as I was. I had no driver's license. I was living with an alias. I had a car with somebody else's plates on it. And, you know, it was just nuts. And I want to also say, I want to address something too. I'm with 5 other alcoholics, and we've been here all day, and they're outside laughing. So if you hear laughter, that's the aftermath of getting sober. So that's exactly what's in my life today. There's happiness in my life, and that's what you might hear in the background, is just that, people enjoying their life and laughing from the gut, something I didn't do for 20 years. So I'd love to hear it, and I hope that it comes through on the tape. But getting back to where I went into the city. I started working. I got a business. The Grand Poupard was back on his feet, and I didn't know where to get help because now I needed laborers to help. And I don't know how to bowl. I didn't know how to I didn't know how to go to church and meet people. I didn't have any social skills outside of drinking and making money. So I went down to the bar, and I went there for the intention of going every day until I made a support group that I could find help with. And I stayed there every day for quite some time. I didn't drink. And One day the barmaid was either putting some kind of pass on me, or at least I perceived it to be a pass, and she said, "Come on, I'll buy you a drink." And I was in the lion's den and I drank. From that point, it was in 1994, I took another hostage. It was a friend of mine that lived in the city that lost his mother and father and was left with his house. I promised to help him pay his rent. I promised to help him do this, that, and the other thing. And what I did was I moved in his house, lived for free for about 2 years, and mooched off the guy with 2 other friends of mine. And I drank endlessly. My addiction became a mess, and that's what happened to me. I mean, I drank so much I could feel my liver swollen and I used to call my kids up in the middle of the night for years because I hadn't been in touch with my kids for 5 years, and I would wait for somebody to answer the phone, but I was so detached I didn't even know which one it was anymore. So I would hang the phone up and start crying because I was never even able to say it was me on the phone. Alcoholism ruined my life, and at some point I had drank enough that I was willing to take a look at something. And that one rehab that I went to, and I guess I failed, or I was a failure, I was willing to listen enough in that rehab to listen to the amount of hope that they gave me that I could get through it. And that's all I had left. I had hope. I had hope that if I stopped drinking and I listened for once in my life, that I could put my life back together. And it was October 5th, 1996. I was walking through Queens, New York, in an area where I didn't belong, with a bottle of vodka and my hair down to my shoulders, probably unshowered and unshaved for a couple of days. It was a holiday, and I guess that's what I believe it was. It may not have been. Every day was a holiday for me. And I was yelling at the bottle and crying, walking through the parking lot at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I looked up and everybody was pulling their family away from me. The kids were pulling it. I had become that person that everybody was afraid of, and I was never that person. I had become that person because I drank myself into being that person. And when I looked up and I realized I had become a literal mess, I was spiritually and financially and morally bankrupt, I made a phone call to my sister, who hadn't reached out to me to help me because she was told not to. And I called her up, and in 45 minutes to an hour, she got to a place she had never seen me before, picked me up and drove me to what I found out later was a detox. I had been in a psychiatric center for 3 hours in 1990 before I went to Seafield, but I was kind of felt pressured into that, and alcoholism finally pressured me into addressing my alcoholism. So I went into this detox, and I started to get honest. The guy said to me, "What's your name?" And I told him my full name, and it was the first time I used my full name in years because I was running away from the law. He asked me, was I married? I told him I didn't know. He asked me, did I have kids? I told him yes. And I couldn't get through the whole thing without crying because I never admitted to being married because I would have to explain what happened. I didn't admit to having children because I'd have to explain why I wasn't in their lives. I didn't give my last name because I had 11 felony warrants out for my arrest. I was a mess, this was tough. And as it turns out, I started to get honest that day. And I told him, truthfully, I think with the exception of the warrants, because I don't know if he'd let me to come in. I don't know if I told him I had warrants out for my arrest or not, but I went through this detox. And the process was supposed to be a few days. And when I finally came to, because obviously I was awake, but it took me 3 days to come to and get some of the alcohol out of my system, I was told that it was suggested to go to a rehabilitation center. And at that time, I think I had the willingness to do that because there was no place else to go. I no longer had the apartment in the city. I didn't have my family anymore. I was destitute. So it was actually, sounded like Club Med to me. They were going to feed me, they were going to clothe me, and I just had to listen. So I stayed 18 days in a detox, went to a 42-day program. In that 42 days, I listened and I tried to absorb things, and I still tried to keep people at a distance with my humor. But I was voted least likely to succeed when I left there because I didn't let people get too close to me, a handful of people. Since I left there, I went to a meeting that day. I'm in a 12-step program. So I went to a meeting that day at 1 o'clock with 6 guys. This guy calls me up at 5 o'clock. He says, the phone rings, my mother answers the phone. She says, "Tom, it's for you." And immediately I get pissed off at my mother because I got 11 felony warrants out for my arrest. Jesus Christ, it's probably the cops. And I thought that everybody was looking for me. As it turned out, nobody wanted me, not even the law. But I grabbed the phone suspiciously. I said, "Who are you?" And he told me his name. I said, "All right, you know." And then I said to him, he said, "You going to a meeting?" I said, "I already went to one." And then I went out to say, you know, as jumped up as I was when I first got out of rehab, I was not scared. I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm fine. I just went to a meeting. I don't have a ride. I don't have a license. I'll get my life back." And then he cut me off. He said, "Why don't you just shut up and listen?" He says, "You got to go to a meeting with me." I said, "You don't even know where I live." He says, "I'm in front of your house." So I'm like, what the hell's going on here, you know? So I peek out the blinds, and sure enough, there's this guy sitting in front of my house. And now I'm thinking he's either with the law or what the hell is this, you know? And a lot of thoughts went through my head. I said, but I'm not going out to the car with this guy because I don't know who the hell he is. And then finally he convinced me to come out. As it turns out, he was another suffering alcoholic that heard that somebody else needed help, and he came to, for the lack of a better term, my rescue and brought me to a meeting. So I had 2 meetings that day. And then the next day I went to a meeting, and the next day I went to a meeting. And by the time I had 5 years cleaned, I had many more meetings than I had days sober. When I first got sober in 2006, I had gone to court, straightened out that stuff, did a little bid in jail, small thing, and everything was dropped. And things that I thought were really big didn't turn out to be big, and the things that I thought would be going away real quick didn't go real quick. And within the first year, I got my life a little bit back together. I had my driver's license back. I had some of my kids back in my life. I was going to meetings every day. I had a lot of support. Some of the people are here tonight. And, you know, I went on and I stayed sober. But sobriety doesn't mean happiness. Sobriety means you got your life back and shit's going to happen. And sometimes bad shit's going to happen. In 1998, I took a sponsee on by the advice of my sponsor. He committed suicide because he couldn't quit using drugs and alcohol. I took it personally. I didn't go to meetings for a few weeks, a month or two. I wound up getting a little depressed. I jumped back into the program and with both feet, and I went into 5 years, and I was sober, and then 9/11 happened. I was in the Bahamas, and I wound up finding myself going into a depression again. But the bottom line is, no matter what happens, I didn't pick up a drink, and I didn't pick up a drug. I have had a very difficult sobriety, but even though that's been the way it is, and it continues to be that way, I have not been at all as miserable as I was on October 5th, 1996. My life is far different than what it was then. It's far from as good as I had hoped that it would have been, but it's far different. If I tell people at meetings, if I would have had a crystal ball when I got sober and be able to see how difficult it was, I may have drank over it because I kind of thought things would fall back into place real fast. It didn't happen that way. But I know now more than I did then, and no matter what, if I don't drink and I help another alcoholic and I go to a meeting and I have a sponsor, which is somebody I call to share more personal things with, and I try to do the next right things do get better. I got my phone ringing, which means one of my sons might be calling me. I only have 2 in my life right now. But that is one of the gifts that I had. When I was running the streets for 5 years, my kids didn't know if I was alive or dead. So today they know at least I'm alive, and I still have issues with some of them. But if I don't drink, I have a shot at becoming a better father, a better coworker, a better husband or boyfriend or whatever it's going to be. But if I do drink, I don't have any of the above. I'm in a business where I house sober people. I'm around newcomers all the time. I believe today that I'm sober by the grace of God, and if it wasn't for these guys that are in my life today with very newly in recovery, I don't think I'd stand a chance of staying sober. I have a lot of respect for people who are newly sober because I know how difficult it is. And I also know how difficult it is to continue to stay sober. But worse than that is being sober for a long period of time, which I understand, and people trying to get back into the program. I go to 3 funerals a year, approximately, for people who pick up drugs and alcohol and pass away. And the only person that suffers in the rooms at the funeral homes is the families of those people that died. So I don't feel bad for alcoholics and drug addicts that died, but I feel bad for the fact that they never got a chance to put those things that meant to them back into their lives. And This recovery thing has been very special to me. I'm going to continue today, as I have yesterday, to go to meetings. And now that I'm 10 and something years sober, I don't know, 10 years and 4 or 5 months, whatever it's been, I can say I still go to 6, 7 meetings a week. My son called me today. We had to go do something with his business, and I was able to be there for him. I haven't been arrested on a drug or alcohol charge since '96, and things are better than my wildest dreams. And they say that would happen. And they say wait for the miracle to happen, and they are better. But things got to get a lot better. So if I'm gifted enough to stay sober, and I'm gifted enough to remember how hard it was for me to get well, I'll be gifted enough never to pick up a drink again. So I don't know what else to say except for people who need to listen to this. They say to fail is in recovery is to never try again. There are no failures in alcohol abuse or drug abuse. There are only people that stop trying. So it took me a long time to get sober. I'd used for 33 years. And today I'm sober by the grace of God and my friends who God put in my life. And I am not a failure today when it comes to alcoholism. And if I continue to stay sober, I won't be a failure in those other parts of my life that are so important to me. So if I'm on this tape to help somebody, and I said something that helps you, I would appreciate it that you pay it forward to the next person when you put your life together. Because this isn't about me today, it's about the next person. And I think that's about it.